Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew Pierce. I'm an attorney with the law firm Boyer Miller here in Houston, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to moderate what I hope will be and expect will be a lively discussion on reopening law firms and offices and updates on COVID and employment law. And I think we've just got a terrific panel and a great cross section to have that discussion. We've got a representative from an international firm, a representative from a firm with 4 offices across the country, and a representative of a firm with a single location here in Houston. So I think we'll get some great cross perspectives on these topics as we discuss what's going on across the country, but maybe most importantly here in Houston. So let me start by making just a very quick introduction, and I'll let these folks maybe introduce themselves a little bit better than I can when they start to speak. But first, I'd like to introduce Russell Lewis. He's a partner at Baker Botts and the chair of the litigation department here in Houston and serves as partner in charge of that office. We also have Diana Gomez, who is a shareholder and the labor and employment co-chair at Chamberlain. And then we also have Chris Hanslick, who is my partner here at Boyer Miller in the litigation section and the firm chairman at Boyer Miller. So thanks to each of you for making the time to be here and really look forward to hearing your comments. So we'll kind of maybe just go right into it. And Chris, I'll start with you and then maybe kind of go around the room, so to speak. Can you walk us through sort of how Boyer Miller handled both the initial work from home order that we received, in March last year, and then the steps that we've taken to reopen since then?
Sure, happy to do that. So I think like most, when the stay at home or work from home order was issued by Harris County in Houston, Texas, we went full remote. We had prepared before that, anticipating that might happen, to make sure that everyone had appropriate equipment to be working from home, where they needed extra monitors or whatever. We made sure we got those to people out of our extra supplies. And for the balance of March and April, that's how we worked, although we did have a handful of attorneys that still came to the office every day, just they felt more comfortable doing that. As April continued on in 2020 and numbers started coming down, a lot of our people were missing the office. I kind of made the decision then that it was important that if we could get back in the office safely, we do that, because the general feeling that we work so well when we collaborate together. And so what I was introduced to a doctor in late April, Dr. Satul Patel, who has a company called Formula Med, and consulted with him on the appropriate guidelines to put in place based on what we knew at the time. And what's interesting, and we haven't heard this in so long, but back then, the end of April of 2020, what we were being told is you get COVID-19 by touch. And it was, keep your hands clean, don't touch your face. And nothing was really being said about masks or the risk of transmission, kind of through the air particles. So we put in, Dr. Patel came up, toured our office, helped me draft using CDC's kind of pronouncements as guidelines. He was treating COVID patients and running this company that was trying to help organizations get back to the office at the time. And we published these guidelines, and then he did a 2-hour Zoom with every employee in the firm to help educate us about the virus and what we knew then, and ways to get it, ways you don't get it, and ways to be safe. So we entered the office May 11th of 2020 on a non-mandatory basis. And within about 10 days, had 60+% of our people back. We have plexiglass shields up. And the thing that I remember about those protocols that we put in place back in May of 2020 was we had a mask policy, that if you were in and out of the common areas, you had to wear a mask. If you were at your desk working, you could take it off. And by comparison, so we published those May 6th, entered the office May 11th. Harris County in Houston, Texas did not enter a mask mandate until June 19th. So, with the guidance of Dr. Patel, we were kind of ahead of, I think, the times on the importance of wearing a mask back then. And by the beginning of June, we eliminated the non-mandatory basis. and had our people back unless they met the CDC's definition of high risk. Since that time, we've consistently tied ourselves to the CDC guidelines, and as they've evolved, we've evolved to where we started allowing guests and visitors in our office in early 2021. And proud to say we've been able to do that without incident since May of 2020. And everyone here is working safe and working together, and we're kind of operating like everyone else in the world now with vaccine versus non-vaccine kind of world, and whether masks are still required or not.
So Diana, how about for you folks? What did your timeline look like, and was it the same across all of your locations, or was it handled on a location by location basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Chris was definitely ahead of the curve there on the masks, and those sorts of considerations are huge. So I also sit on the management committee for my firm, and so we looked over what we had going on in Georgia, Philadelphia, our offices in Houston and San Antonio, and we kind of had to come up with a policy that was fluid, depending on the offices and where they were at and the amount of COVID, positive COVID testing cases, all those sorts of things. And so we actually had the same non-mandatory return to work. Some attorneys did feel comfortable coming into the office every day, but our staff was permitted to work at home, and attorneys were permitted to work at home. And even until this day, we are now, I think, in phase 2 of the plan. And most people are coming in the office 3 days a week. And the rest it's voluntary if you want to come in or not. And so we're a little bit slower getting everybody back into the office, but masks were important. We made sure we had the plexiglass up. We're trying to follow, in Texas, it's very unique, right? So we have the CDC telling us one thing, we have OSHA, and they're kind of in the same camp with their recommendations. But then Texas, we had a minimum checklist from the Texas state government that employers were to look at. And then you had Harris County that had their own requirements, mask requirements. And so a lot of it was taking all these different guidelines together and trying to put it in a way where you could help maintain a safe workplace. Because under OSHA and under employment laws, employers are required to provide a safe working environment, right? That's a non-delegable duty. And so it put a lot of pressure on firms to meet their client needs, to get the deadlines done, to meet with witnesses while maintaining a safe environment. We were very fortunate that here in Houston, a lot of our judges went to Zoom, federal and state court. So that was helpful. And we were able to do a lot of Zoom meetings. But yeah, we're in phase 2, and hopefully by the end of this year, we'll go into phase 3 where everyone's back in and we're full back at the office.
So that would be the final phase, is the phase 3?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And Russell, for you folks, I can only imagine both managing the Houston office, and then how that works with an international firm. Can you share some insight about how y'all have managed this process?
Sure, absolutely. And my experience is somewhat similar to Diane's and Chris's, in the fact that, of course, in March and April, when everything shut down, we quickly did the same thing and invested significantly in technology upgrades and things like that to really accommodate people's ability to work from home. And right now we're in what we call phase 2A of our plan, which sounds similar to Diane's. But 2A is effectively voluntary for lawyers and for staff who want to come into the office, and they have access. Phase 2 was lawyers only, and then a kind of skeleton crew of staff who could keep the lights on and packages delivered and things like that. We've seen a steady resurgence of people coming back to the office, especially this year. But one of the biggest challenges that I think Diane alluded to was, in Texas, we're just so differently situated, and have been differently situated over the course of this for the last few months, that, there can be a broad policy, but it's never going to be one size fits all. And so in each of the offices, you're going to have to make somewhat different accommodations to be able to really meet the needs of the folks on the ground there. And in Houston, we have just for the last few months been ahead of other offices in the fact that things are opening up around us. The mask mandate is effectively has lifted in most places. So the challenge has really been finding, what's the right fit in each geographic location while maintaining the framework of the larger policy.
And Russell, Diana, I'm curious to get your perspectives. Chris alluded to sort of our desire within Boyer Miller to maintain a collaborative work environment. And, for a lot of us, we feel like that's best accomplished when we're here together in person. How were y'all able to maintain a collaborative work environment when people were working remotely?
Yeah, I agree. That was one of the main reasons we heard people wanting to come back into the office was collaboration and getting to meet with each other in meetings in person. I think we had frequent Zoom meetings. And I know people are tired of Zoom and they don't want to do Zoom anymore, but that was kind of the best at that time that we did throughout the course of early 2020 through the summer. And whether it was weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, it helped just to even engage and say, how are you guys doing? How are your kids? What's going on? What's coming up? So we had Zoom meetings with our section head. We had Zoom meetings with subgroups. I had Zoom meetings with my team. And it really helped. It actually helped to get more communication than they probably did otherwise, because we're always so busy and out of the office. I think everyone was actually excited, at least initially, to be able to talk to the partners and your coworkers every week. It was actually helpful, but of course everyone got tired of it. Nobody wants to do it anymore. So
that's similar. I mean, we had every meeting that I had before the pandemic converted over to Teams, right? So, I mean, we didn't really miss a step in the number of meetings or the engagement points. And at first, and we had a number of different events and other things that we tried to do just to maintain connectivity. I mean, one thing that I did in this office, and it was somewhat built off of a lot of people's experiences when schools weren't opening up, is we developed some kind of smaller working group pods with our lawyers, if you will, 6 or 7 people who would just make a point, cross section of people, partners, associates, paralegals, others who could meet together, once a month or so in some sort of virtual fashion and kind of come up with something fun. So we tried to incorporate things like that to maintain connectivity. But as Diane has aptly pointed out, the appetite for that has somewhat decreased tremendously, as we've opened back up. And that's what's really making this, gradual reopening process. There's a drive. People want to get back in the office to some degree. I think everybody does.
And Chris, I know there are a few things that you did here at Boyer Miller to maintain that connectivity. You want to describe what a couple of those efforts were?
Sure. Back during the work from home phase, obviously, I think like a lot of people, we incorporated a weekly happy hour, BYOB, obviously, but got everybody together on Zoom and tried to, the first one was like everybody just kind of talking and catching up. And then before each one after that would pose a question, what's the favorite thing you've seen on Netflix to share with everyone, or a book you've read? It's kind of just, or what's the craziest or oldest board game you played with your kids, and just so people could share and kind of stay connected. And then I don't even remember where I got the idea, if I read it somewhere or what, but I started interviewing our employees via Zoom one-on-one and just had a standard set of questions, and then we would publish that to everyone with the link, and we just learned a lot about each other that we wouldn't otherwise know. And so it was kind of corny, but I called it Boyer Miller TV. And so it kind of turned into, my own version of Jimmy Fallon or something. But we, everyone from our receptionist to our co-founders, and had the same set of like 5 or 6 questions we went over, and it was well received. I enjoyed doing it. Like I said, I learned a lot about everybody, and I think everyone else did. So got us through what was a very unusual and awkward and, kind of anytime in uncertainty, right? People get a little anxious, and I think we all shared those feelings back in March and April of last year for sure.
So Diana, you mentioned the pretty quick transition to Zoom hearings and even Zoom trials, which it made me chuckle, because after Harvey, I remember when the criminal courts moved into the civil court building, people were begging for opportunities to try cases outside of the courthouse. And we were told over and over again, it's an impossibility. It'll never happen. We can't do it. And then after COVID, within 2 weeks, we're all doing things via Zoom. I'm sure there's elements of those Zoom hearings that judges will say are going to stay with us. I'm curious, are there any things that any of y'all have done post-COVID, whether it's the working remote, whether, Russell, it's these smaller pods that you were describing? Are there things that are going to survive COVID that you think are better business practices that you've learned and developed as a result of COVID that you think just maybe a better way going forward?
Definitely. So, our poor courthouses got hit so hard. We had the flood, then we had the freeze, and then we had COVID. And you're absolutely right. It's forced us to do these Zoom hearings, Zoom depots, those sorts of things. I will say that the time that it saves attorneys, not sitting in the courthouse from 8 to 1 p.m. waiting for your case to get called, and being able to be at your desk, work, get on the hearing and come back. That's great. I think that's good for the judges too. I think many of them will keep the Zoom hearings. I think for depositions, I know people didn't like it, and I don't agree with the give us all your exhibits before the deposition. I thought that was hilarious. I had a few attorneys asked me that. That's not going to happen. But I did like that you were able to pull up, I should say, not just for depositions, but for the hearings, to pull up an exhibit, show the judge on the Zoom screen, this is exactly what you should be looking at, and then highlight it in front of him or her, instead of having to say, can you go to the top of page 4, look 4 lines down, right there in the case. That's where it says what I'm telling you, I promise. You're able to actually pull it up and show them. I thought that was invaluable. I actually love that. I do miss being able to be there and kind of the back and forth and being able to talk with the judge, but things like that, I don't mind Zoom hearings or Zoom depots, although the Zoom depots, I do agree, those are probably better in person. But to save expense, if you have someone who's out of country or even out of state, instead of fighting over who's going to fly where and who's going to pay the costs of that, flying that person in or whatever, you can just do it via Zoom. I think that'll be beneficial in many ways, to the extent you can do that.
I think one thing we'll see stick around are Zoom and team status conferences. I mean, I have dealt with a lot of some larger multi-district litigation during this time period, and the ability to bring in that many lawyers this quickly into a status conference rather than have everybody convene on the courthouse, I mean, has some real upside as far as efficiency. So I see that sticking around. Depositions, I think, stick around depending on what the witness. I mean, there are some that you're just going to want to be there in person. There are others that you may think are completely suitable to do remotely. And then I also think there is one thing that will stick around. This kind of veers off somewhat into a different topic, is just efficiency of our being able to do things from home that we couldn't before. One example, I mean, you may have an 8 a.m. conference call. Normally you would head into the office, you see the freeways all backed up. You'd struggle through the freeway. You'd probably get on the call in the elevator and, struggle to get to your office. Like, now you got options, right? I mean, you can turn around and do that from your house because your home office is set up and able to facilitate that and get through that and then go in later in the day. So, I mean, I think it has some real upsides that will last beyond COVID.
And I kind of agree with everything that's been said. And I think to the point Russell was just making, I've noticed participation or attendance in meetings has gone up because of that flexibility. Maybe it was an HBA meeting and you're sitting at your office going, God, do I really have time to get in my car, go downtown or whatever? But if I can just hit a link from my desk, I've saved an hour out of my day. So I'm more likely to attend that meeting because I've cut out 20 or 30 minutes on either side of it. So I think that's one of the positives. And I agree, my view, similar to Russell's, on smaller, maybe discovery hearings, on smaller, maybe not the party witnesses or the key witnesses in the case. You don't anticipate using a lot of documents. Those depositions can be done efficiently via Zoom. Key party cases, heavy document intensive cases, I think those are still going to be desirable in person. Same with hearings and mediations. I think in your smaller cases, I think a Zoom mediation is going to be continue to be the case and be very efficient for everyone. And in the more complex cases, it's that human dynamic just can't be supplemented sometimes in a deposition or in a mediation where the mediator or the parties need that face time, because there's just being together, there's emotion and that happens, the interpersonal and the nonverbal communication that occurs is important. So, as humans, we're meant to be connected.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead. I think, this technology is so much better than a phone or conference call, but it can't supplant the human interaction in person.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with that. The key witnesses for depots, I think those are still going to be in person. And Chris mentioned something I thought was interesting, which are the meetings, the HBA meetings, your committee meetings, your nonprofit meetings, those sorts of things. Yeah, I think we've seen an increase in participation. Also with even CLEs like this, being able to get everyone to come on, people you would not otherwise get in the same room at the same time, being able to get them and have them at a CLE is huge. I will say, as Chris mentioned, there is some, lacking of networking, that human contact, the how are you doing, how's the family doing before and after, that people still like and enjoy. So I'm sure we're going to have a good mix of that, of in-person and then Zoom meetings. But I agree, for some of these things, Zoom is super convenient.
Yeah, it was funny. We had an emergency hearing in Dallas County on Friday, and I think there were 4 lawyers in attendance, and none of them were anywhere near Dallas. And so we all joked that, and it was a valuable hearing. It actually got the matter to a resolution, and none of that could have occurred if we didn't have this Zoom capability. And I think, Diana, to your point, that's, I think, such a fascinating element to all of this, because I think you're right. The substance of these meetings, I think we can have in a way that's almost the same as when we're together, but it's the moments before and the moments after. We've talked internally about having an associate on a call, and it's the conversation with the associate leading up to the call or after everybody's hung up, when you break down what just occurred, and there's some real valuable learning moments there that are hard to replicate. And so I think really it is about finding that balance. One other thing that sorry, go ahead, Russell.
Oh, I was going to say, I completely agree with that. I mean, there are real benefits to being in the office as far as just collaboration, kind of taking it to the next level, that thought, that analysis, that creativity, and also mentoring. I mean, nothing can take the place of that. Really, in the office, the experience that you're talking about with the phone call is a perfect example. So, I think the landing spot in all of this is going to be somewhere in the middle. It can't possibly be you can do this job entirely remotely from wherever in the world, right? On the other hand, there's going to be a real push when we get through the other side of this to, people don't want to be in the office necessarily 5 days a week in the same manner that they were in 2019, right? So there's going to be a happy middle ground that people are going to struggle to find and land it in the right spot.
Yeah, I think, Russell, we don't have to wait till the other side. It's already happening, right? They're on the more flexibility from where we work. The key area is making sure people are still working. They're not just out of the office.
Yeah, that's a common question that I get as an employment lawyer. Whether or not can you require staff to come in? One of the interesting ones I got was someone who was a receptionist, not at a law firm. This is actually a non-law firm, but the receptionist didn't want to come in. She wanted to continue working remotely. And I was like, that's a little hard to do. It's like, I'm not sure the receptionist job can be, unless you have like a little video screen to say hello. And so that's, there's some jobs where you need to be there, right? Your courier person who's going to go to the courthouse and deliver stuff, they need to be there in person. And so you take into account, what does the job require? Are they fulfilling the job duties that they need to do? And do you need them there, right? And so most of the time, the collaboration, that's up to the partners. If you have somebody in your office who's not doing what they're supposed to do, there's ways to address that. Or maybe you say, I need you to come in and let's work to help you figure out what we're doing. How can we make this better? So there are times for that, but and that's an entirely separate discussion from accommodation requests, right? If someone's asking for an accommodation based on a disability or for religious reasons, with regard to the mask and those sorts of things. Those are things you have to take by case basis, talk to your employment lawyer, your HR folks, and figure out, can you accommodate it or not? That's entirely separate. But one of the questions I get a lot are people's fear of coming into the office. If someone's scared to come into the office, can you accommodate that? Well, no. I mean, if you're going to need a disability accommodation, usually you're going to have some sort of record or doctor's note or doctor's information as to these are the limitations for your work restrictions, and this is what you can or can't do, and then the firm has to take that into account.
Yeah. I just want to touch on something I think Andrew and both Russell mentioned. That's the training aspect. The younger lawyers out there in their first few years, they've lost some time being remote because of, as soon as the call was over, if you're on Zoom, everybody hits leave meeting and it's on to the next one. And when you're in the office, there's that, hey, here's why I said that, there's that training that goes on, that development. And I think it's important for the development of our profession that the senior people, like those of us on this panel, as well as the younger lawyers who maybe were new and didn't experience it, appreciate the value in both, right? It's incumbent upon the senior people to make sure it happens, but to the younger lawyers out there, appreciate the value that they receive by getting that, so that their development can be accelerated. I don't think that can be lost. And I think the board, if we talk about it, the better to bring awareness to it.
I agree with that. I think it's what I've been trying to do is, after meetings with clients and we have everybody on the phone, or after witness interviews, calling the associates afterwards and saying, what do you think? This is why I did that, just like Chris was saying. But it's different. It's different than when being in person and make sure they feel comfortable to kind of give you their thoughts and what we're doing. I agree that that's really missed with this working at remote work environment.
Yeah, I think it's a big workflow disruptor in a lot of ways too, because it's so much easier to walk down the hall. Let's say you're a mid-level associate, to walk down the hall and find a junior to work with and hand it off and come back in 2 hours and check on it, do a little bit of mentoring. A lot of that happens just naturally when you're in the office, and it's really hard to replicate that over Teams. You like Diana says, you can do it, you can check in and everything else, but it really is not the same as that in-office environment. So I agree, Chris, that the younger lawyers have really missed out on a 1.5 years of real hands-on training. And, we're going to have to find a way to make sure that happens going forward.
100%.
And I agree with all that. One thing that's been, I think, really interesting for me, I'd love to get your perspectives on sort of this other side of the coin, because I think everything that we've talked about in terms of the value of having people together for us, maintaining our culture and that collaborative work environment are also critically important. But I've also learned some pretty valuable lessons, because I do not work well from home. There's too many distractions. I'm just not efficient. But what I realized is I probably projected that on others. And I realized that there are some other folks who are probably even more efficient, at least on some types of matters, whether it's doc review or working on motions. And I think that some of that flexibility is equally valuable. We had rolled out a policy we called our any chair, anywhere policy, where we allowed folks, the opportunity to work from home, have that discretion and that flexibility. I'm curious, Russell and Diana, have y'all seen any of that where, and Russell, I think you alluded to it earlier, where some of that flexibility has really been well received by some folks who really enjoy that opportunity to work remotely where it makes sense. How have y'all managed that? Because you have such disparate personalities and how people view being in the office versus working from home. It can be a lot to juggle.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I think a lot of this, there's a chapter in the book still yet to be written, right? Because as we all come back and we have a more formal reopening, probably later this year, we'll have to roll out some sort of remote work expectation or policy. And I think a lot of firms are going to do that. And as I said before, I think it has to land somewhere in the middle, because you've got one bookend, right, of somebody who says, I can do this completely remotely all the time. Well, that doesn't work for the reasons we talked about: collaboration, training, and everything else. You are missing out. On the other hand, nobody's got a magic wand that's going to put us back into 2019. And there are some real efficiencies, as you point out, to be gained from working remotely. And some people do it better than others. Some people may opt to be in the office or want to be in the office 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week. Other people, they may, they may want to have more flexibility on Mondays and Fridays or something like that. So it won't be a real one size fits all. And like any good mediation, it's going to land somewhere in the middle, and everybody on the bookends are going to be a little unhappy, right? I mean, I think that's where we're heading in the world, but it's something that we have to face, and it'll be a recruiting issue too, right? I mean, the talent in your firm that really wants to, have more flexibility, if firms don't accommodate that to some degree, they will look elsewhere. I mean, the market will drive this to some degree.
You're right. It really is a recruiting and retention issue. It's a very good point. Diana, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Russell. If you have great talent, you want to keep them, you're going to engage with them. You're going to talk with them and see what can you do, what kind of flexibility is feasible for your practice. And, it's all about communication, right? And being willing to listen and consider what some people are requesting. But as far as recruitment, I absolutely agree. I mean, we're hearing a lot about different firms who want to be entirely remote, and I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but there's conversations out there about having remote work firms or remote working firms where everybody in the firm is remote. And if they need an office, they rent out some space for depots or meetings or different things like that. I'm not sure where that's going to go because of the things we've discussed here in terms of collaboration and having those invaluable experiences with your coworkers and mentoring younger attorneys. But I know that that's out there. I know a lot of our younger associates are hearing about it. They like the idea of being at home and working whenever they want. So it's a discussion that we need to have when managing the firm to figure out what are we going to do about this and how can we work with it within the system we have and we need to make that happen and retain the people we want to retain and recruit the people we want to recruit.
Yeah, I think it's been touched on, but I think it's about evolution. It's about communicating expectations, but also understanding. Everyone said it already on this call, but collaboration and training and development, those things happen in certain environments and they can't in others. And if firms hold those things near and dear to their heart and believe it's part of how they're successful and communicate that, then I think you're going to see that, again, rather than the extremes, more the hybrid that it will then be indicative of firms evolving with the times, using technology to their advantage, but not going completely away from what's made them successful over the years. And so then it comes down to, for me, at least in how I think about what we'll do for our firm, is clear communication of expectations. When you're in the office, when you're not, how you work when you're in the office, how you work when you're remote. I alluded to it earlier. It's a work remote policy. It's not a out of the office a couple of days a week kind of thing, right? So you really need to still be productive. This is still at least a 5-day-a-week job or more. Clients have concerns and demands that need to be addressed because at the end of the day, we are a professional service industry. Without clients, we won't have a business. So Andrew's heard me say this before, as others at Boyer Miller, we can have all the fancy policies we want. We don't take care of clients, we won't have a business. So it won't matter what's on paper as a policy. So if we can't put the client first, or at least have the client's needs in the conversation, right? What happens in these conversations is we start talking partners versus associates or staff about, well, what do we want or need or expect? And the client gets lost. And so the client's a stakeholder in these conversations, and we need to make sure that their needs are addressed, or at least part of the conversation, whether that's bringing them in and asking them in some type of advisory board, or just knowing kind of traditionally what they want. I would say that that's what we're focused on here. And I think if others out there aren't focused on that, they should be. And it should be part of the overall dialogue and how communications are set and communicated within a firm, frankly, with any business. If any business loses sight of the customer and the end user, whatever it is, their widget is that they're relying on to generate revenue, you're in trouble.
Mhm.
So speaking of clients, we talked a little bit about kind of networking efforts. A lot of our discussion so far has been about policies for our employees, for the attorneys, for the staff. How are y'all handling third parties coming into your space, whether it be for depositions or client meetings? And then maybe even more broadly, how are y'all handling networking events, firm events where you used to bring in just a lot of folks in for different functions? What does that look like now? And I think for Russell and Diana, kind of what's phase 2, phase 3 look like for that? And where are you now? Where do you hope to get to?
I think originally we all had hazmat suits. No, no, that's what it felt like. No, we had the attorneys. If somebody wanted to bring someone into the office, we did not do that for quite some time. But now, if you want to bring in someone to the office, we have a list of requirements. We have things that the attorney who has the guests or guests coming in the office is responsible to ensure: wearing masks, asking certain questions. We used to have, and I don't know if we still have it. I think we may temperature checks. I'm not sure if we still have it or not. But we have the same kind of standards as we do for people in the office, for people coming on, if not more. And I believe in our conference rooms still, they may have recently taken them down, but I don't think so. We have the plexiglass. And so our office is pretty hardcore on the safety.
Yeah, since the beginning, and during most of it, our guest policy was guests weren't allowed, but for situations where you could get permission to bring somebody in. I mean, there were depositions and other things that had to be conducted, and we were able to host those. So we've made exceptions along the way, but the general policy has been no guests during the height of it. We have loosened that incrementally to now, and every guest has to certify and go through all of the process and adhere to our COVID protocols. We've loosened that now to permit guests. We are still, have signage up and things like that, specifically for unvaccinated folks. So, I mean, this is kind of changing to evolve with the situation we find ourselves in externally with Houston, I think, and some consistency there. But that's it's been a process.
And our experience is the same. We started out no guest at all, period. And then we started allowing guests earlier in 2021, and the same, the checklist everyone sees that you sign off on. And we had a temperature check, little monitor, kiosk thing you would stand in front of. And as things have continued to evolve, we've now done away with all that. And if you have a mask, if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And if you haven't been vaccinated, you're still required to wear a mask in our common areas. We definitely opened up more business as far as having guests in, reduce the restrictions on numbers within certain conference rooms, which were limited early on. Now those are slowly opening back up. And we're planning events, in-person events in the fall to host here in the office. So I think we'll have our first one maybe in late August and have a couple others planned for the fall, assuming things continue the way they are.
So, Chris, there was a little bit of a reference earlier to Senate Bill 6. Can you describe generally what that is and what impact that might have on the things we're talking about?
Sure. So what started as Senate Bill 6, made it through both the Senate and the House and was signed early June by Governor Abbott. And it basically is a liability protection for employers for lawsuits where an employee claims to have contracted COVID-19 while in the workplace. And without going into the details, it establishes a gross negligence standard, basically, where you've got to, a plaintiff would have to show that the employer basically disregarded standard protocols and guidelines in the office. So the things we've been talking about, you know, it's a retroactive law, so it goes back to March 13th of 2020. So basically any lawsuit that was filed after March 13th, this law would apply to. So when we talked about, you know, if an employer got you back in the office and there weren't plexiglass or guidelines that were, you know, administered similar to what CDC said or something, there could be some potential exposure. But if they follow that, this new law is basically an immunity for the employer, unless it can be shown. And there's Russell made the analogy earlier when we were talking. It's kind of similar to the Med-Mal legislation passed in 2003, 2004 about you have to get an expert immediately, and the expert's got to say that you got COVID because of the employer's lack of diligence in following the right guidelines. Pretty sweeping legislation that the federal government tried, the Republicans in the federal government tried early on in the stimulus bills that didn't get done, and the Texas legislature was able to pass it.
And has Governor Abbott signed it?
He did. I think it was like the 14th of June or something like that. And it was effective immediately upon signature and retroactive back to March 13th of 2020.
Diana, Russell, anything to add on that Senate Bill 6?
I think a lot of employers were waiting to see what would happen with that. We had a few laws that were going in the pipeline regarding COVID-19. I think there was even one, I think it stalled with regard to requiring vaccine passports and those sorts of things, whether or not you could even ask employees whether they had received a vaccine. The EOC said, yes, you can. And then there was a House bill in the Texas legislature that was going to say, no, you can't. They would make it part of the labor code to prohibit you from doing that. And I don't think that went anywhere. But the Senate Bill 6 was a big deal. And people wanted employers who wanted to get back to work, service the client, which is what's most important pretty much for any business. And to be able to do that, there were certain people that needed to be in the office, and they were hesitant to do that because people were saying, well, you've got a non-delegable duty to provide a safe work environment. And so, you know, speaking about that, we were talking earlier about what cases did we see. There was a case that came out where I believe it was the husband who sued his employer because his wife, who didn't work for his employer, got sick with COVID and passed away. And I think that one got thrown out. But we are seeing a trickling of some of these sorts of cases of, can I tie some sort of injury to me or my family to the work environment?
Yeah, I think employers welcome this because employers want some firm guidance, right? And because you're trying to triangulate and read tea leaves and try to figure out where to go with all of this stuff. And everybody, well-intended, right? But I mean, different factions of government are saying different things, and you're trying to figure out, you know, what is the county saying versus what did the state just do? And, you know, something like this Senate bill that, you know, provides you with some more concrete kind of understanding of what the obligation is, I think is a positive.
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, I think we're probably all familiar, and I know we discussed briefly before we actually got on the Zoom about the recent Houston Methodist case, and I'm familiar with at least one law firm that required COVID vaccinations of all of its employees, subject to either medical exemption or a religious exemption. So I'm curious, and we're getting close to our allotted time, but are there any other things that y'all are seeing out there that other firms or other companies have been trying and either have had success or not had success? Anything else y'all seen other folks doing?
Yeah, I don't know if this directly answers the question, but what I've seen some of our clients struggling with is just the availability of people in the workforce. I think first because of the extra benefits for unemployment, we're making it hard to fill positions. I think that, you know, those benefits have stopped. So I think people are returning back to work, but also probably getting a little bit higher wage. and then the struggle with the work remote policies and where certain companies, and there was an article just yesterday, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, certain Wall Street firms are saying you got to be back in the office, and their competitors are taking advantage of that. They're saying, well, we'll be flexible. We're going to see that, across all industries, and there'll be a real challenge for talent, kind of a war on keeping talent that I think will continue to evolve.
Yeah, I think remote work and vaccines are kind of the flashpoints that people see coming. Certainly on remote work and how people adapt to that, and what you can and can't do, and the people who adapt to it well will see success from that. But you're going to have to be agile and nimble. And then on the vaccines, it's are you mandating? Are you encouraging? And if so, how are you encouraging it? Right? Are you giving a PTO day? I mean, we've seen some companies offer direct financial incentives for vaccination. I mean, people are taking different approaches to all of this, in an area where there aren't any real clear answers all the time.
Yeah, and I'll say a lot of those questions, the EOC has done its best to address them for employers, especially with the incentives. They had initially provided us with guidance early in January, and then I think they removed it, and now they've given us guidance last month with what employers can or can't do. We all work at law firms. It's important to take a look at what the EOC says, OSHA says, the state, and then the county. And it's a lot. And I know it's a lot. And many times, at our firm, there is a lot of discussion before we implement phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I mean, and I tell people all the time, everyone's got to be patient. Everyone has to communicate well, because it is a lot of work. We are in uncharted waters, everybody, the courts included, who are reviewing any of these potential cases. And so if you are providing your best effort, which I think most of the firms are doing, that's what matters, right? If you're doing the best that you can to follow the guidance and the rules, that's all that you can do. And so to give everybody a little bit of go easy on yourself to a certain extent. If you don't get it right, if someone notices that this was a policy but it's not working out, that's okay. That's what we're doing. We're changing it if we need to change it, and we're looking at it if we need to look at it. And so just with that understanding that that's what's going to happen right now, and for at least the foreseeable future, that's what's going to be happening.
I was going to maybe ask one last question, but I think that's actually maybe a perfect place to end it. I agree. I've told Chris, as the chair of our firm, that the two things that I thought that he did that were just exceedingly wise was, one, communication, right? Which is exactly what you're speaking to, Diana. And then second is, most everything that we've done has been tied to recommendations from the CDC, or, as Chris alluded to, from Dr. Patel, right? Because Chris has said, we're lawyers, not doctors. And so we rely on the expertise of others. And I think when people see you doing that, they know exactly what you said. They give you some grace because they know you're doing the best you can, and you're trying to make the right decision. So I guess I will leave it with this last question as we're coming out of time. What for each of you has been the biggest lesson learned that you'll take forward with you? It's been such an amazingly tumultuous year. Nobody could have expected it. Nobody could have planned for it. I'm curious what for each of you has really, hit home the hardest, and something that you'll take with you going forward.
I think for me, it's the need to be flexible. I mean, this whole thing has just had so many ups and downs, right? I mean, you think back to where we were last March, and everyone thinking, well, we'll be back in the office in a week, right? And see everybody then. Turned out not to be the case. 30 days turned out not to be the case. And I mean, it has been amazing to see how resilient people are, and how agile people have been adjusting to this. And the other thing I think is just got to give a bit of a shout out to the IT and litigation support people behind the scenes and all of this. The fact that we're doing this right now, right? And we've all got the technology in place to have this work really seamlessly now, in a way that frankly back in 2019, would have been much more difficult to achieve. I mean, it's amazing the advances that firms have made during this time period. A lot of it for the better.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree absolutely. Much thanks to our IT folks, assistants, everyone in the office, associates, paralegals, everyone behind the scenes has just been incredible, just incredible throughout this time. We had a seamless transition as well. Clients were serviced. We had one of our best years last year. I just think it was amazing to watch. And the lesson that I learned is, as Russell was saying, flexibility. There are certain ways, we practice at so many years, been practicing a while, and you just get used to, going to a depot, having my depot binder, having this, doing it the way I want to do it, and just telling yourself, it's okay. You've been practicing almost 20, you can change your ways. And out of it, I learned that I do like being able to present things on the screen. And so it's really brought me into updated technology from our presentations at trial and for Zoom. I intend to continue that when I have trials and depositions where I'm able to manipulate the exhibits on an iPad and show it. It was invaluable. So being flexible.
I think for me, maybe similar with the word I used, and I used it earlier, is it highlighted the importance of evolving and evolution, because there's old sayings about if you're not moving forward, if you're just standing still, you're going backwards. And what happened over the last year just put a hyper focus and accelerated the need to evolve. And so I think that was my big takeaway. It certainly also reemphasized the importance of communication. Overly communicate to try to calm people down, calm yourself down, your partners, your staff, as to what was going on and what we were doing and why we were doing it. Every communication we made is through this time was, hey, everyone's health and safety is our priority, but so is the organizations, and we've got to do things to find the balance for those. So I think those were the things for me.
Great. Well, Russell, Diana, Chris, thank you all so much. Really some just tremendous insights, really valuable thoughts, and very much appreciated. So thanks to each of you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for
Thank you.
inviting me.